We are recording.
All right. Welcome to another Rust WebAssembly meeting. Thanks for showing up, everybody. So to start it off, we have some RFC, not triage, but just discussion, NPM depths.
Yeah, so this RFC has been open for a bit of a second. I really should have popped this up ahead of time. Good job, me. Anyways, I wanted to check in and see, I know that there is a question of what the algorithm that WasmPack will use when writing this, which I'm happy to write out. I don't think it will be terribly complicated. But I just wanted to see if there was any like outstanding things to address that hasn't been commented on it yet. Since we have like a sync conversation, sometimes it can be a little bit nicer to talk about it in the throughput. A voice
So
improved.
one thing that I forget who it was, but someone was asking about, and I think it was a fine point to bring up, was like why not generate the package JSON from the cargo toml? Like we agree that like what we want to emit is a package JSON, right? Because that's what all the JavaScript tooling uses.
Yes.
But there's also the question of like since they're at different phases, like we could potentially generate the cargo or the package JSON from the cargo toml. I think it's a fair question. I don't personally
Sure.
think we should do it, but I think it is something that like we should describe like why.
Yeah, so for the sake of anyone watching this video, I can talk about why I don't think that's a good idea here, and then I will make sure that it's clear in the RFC. But using a package JSON is beneficial because it affords us some cool new features, as well as reduces the complexity of trying to take one package management system and jam it into another one. And so I'm going to start with the jamming one package management system into another one, and then I'll finish with why it gives us some cool new features. So the first thing to say is that WasmPack has always generated a package JSON, and it will continue to generate a package JSON. Writing package JSONs from hand can be a huge pain in the butt, and I don't recommend them. And I think that this process can also probably help us avoid having people to write package JSONs from hand, but I'll talk about that in a second. So the big thing is that, first off, there is no section for NPM dependencies in a cargo toml, so we'll have to create one. Two, how semver is expressed in a package JSON is different than in a cargo toml. And so in a cargo toml, the hat semver expression is default and elided, which is to say that it's not present, but it's assumed, whereas in a package JSON, it's not. And while we can potentially easily say, well, if we express npm package semver in cargo toml, we'll use cargo toml defaults. But like, there's a bunch of like brain stuff happening there that is really easy to screw up, and screwing up your dependency is like a big mistake and can be really a huge pain in the butt to debug. So I don't think we want to do that. And so that's why I don't want to put them in there. But the other cool thing about having people write out a package JSON, which I believe Powen actually, like this is not necessarily my idea, this is like Powen's suggestion on the RFC, was we don't currently, like right now, we basically make a cargo toml or make a package JSON from your cargo toml. However, if there are things in your cargo toml that you would want to change as it becomes a package JSON, you currently have to do that manually. If we have you generate, like write a package JSON, and then that gets processed by WasmPack, what we can do is, instead of ignoring redundant fields across your package JSON and cargo toml, you can use the package JSON that you include in your crate to override fields in your cargo toml. So like, let's say you wanted your npm package name to be different than like the cargo package name, for example. When you generate your package JSON, you could do that. If you wanted them to have Semver versions that were different. You could override that, or any of those types of things. I don't necessarily think keeping the Semver versions different is like a good idea, but having you write a cargo toml, or having you write a package JSON that is then processed through WASMPack will give you some options to override stuff, which I think is cool and is currently not an option. And if we wanted to give people the option to override package JSON fields, then I would recommend that they write a package JSON anyways, and we would just do a diff on those. So I don't know. It seems like it has several benefits. And then additionally with the package JSON, I guess like if you push a package JSON like source up to GitHub, all of these tools know how to use it. Like npm audit knows how to use it, Greenkeeper, Dependabot. I personally am not interested in teaching something like Greenkeeper how to read npm packages out of a cargo toml, and I feel like it's a hard sell. Though again, I can admit that it's certainly possible to do, but I don't think it's ideal. So that's my justification there. I don't know if you have any response on that, but
I mean, that all sounds good to me. I got a little bit confused by something you said earlier, but before I jump into that, I just wanted to like reiterate that like basically like I think it would be viable to generate a package JSON from like extra metadata fields in a cargo toml. But like I think the reason that we shouldn't is because of the things you listed, but like to generalize them all into like a one sentence thing would be like you don't have to figure out what the mapping is. Like you're trying to generate a package JSON. It's not like something that you can ignore. You have to kind of know what's going in there. And so you don't have to figure out a mapping from anything to what does that mean it's going to generate in my package JSON. Like
right.
You just get to control it directly. And I think that's a valuable thing to have. But so backing up a little bit, you said something about WASMPack has always generated package JSON and how we don't want people to write package JSONs by hand. But that also seems at odds with like, we're going to ask people to write package JSON by hand in order to express the dependencies of the WASM that they generate.
So it's similar to the npm wrapping tricks we're doing right now. If you npm init or npm install in a directory, it will add that dep for you to a package JSON. It will create a dependencies like object and add them in there with whatever the latest Semver is with the hat. So there's plenty of functionality in the npm client that we're wrapping, as well as stuff that we can add ourselves, that like typing like WASMPack dep or something where we could basically just have it write it for them. So I don't actually think that that's like an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's something npm already does and we can also do. So I mean, writing JSON is a pain because there's a lot of punctuation. I always mess it up.
Yeah, the not allowing trailing commas is the worst. All right, so that sounds good. Did we have anything else to talk about for the dependencies RFC? Oh, I have something else to talk about for the dependencies RFC.
I feel like there's a fair amount of stuff. But assuming that I can get a bunch of what I just said written down in probably like a more coherent way, I guess I just want to see if there's any like huge blockers, because there was a lot of conversation on the RFC, but a lot of it felt like it was a bit hard for me to necessarily be able to tell how much of it was relevant and how much of it wasn't. So if there's any like big things in our head that we think are like real blockers.
Yeah, so the one potential crinkle that I have is, say I'm writing a library crate, not something that's compiled to WASM, but something that is designed for WASM and crates that are themselves compiling to WASM to use. And I want to have a dependency in the final generated WASM on some NPM package. Like say if console error panic hook wanted to depend on an NPM package to pretty print objects or whatever, some kind of thing like that. Like is WASM-Pack going to find its package JSON and bring that into the larger project as well? And I
Yes.
think it's okay to say not on the first step, but like I do think we need to like define what we're going to do here.
Yeah, so I think this RFC, and I can address it in the RFC. Like, I think on a first pass, we should just try and do it for like depth one. Um, but yeah, it should recursively crawl down and grab any package JSONs that may otherwise exist.
I would say, at least for me, I would probably advocate for saying that the MVP should include the recursive traversal,
Oh,
so
okay.
transitively. But I also think it's pretty simple to do in terms of like we would just serialize out the directory containing Karotamu for all WASM bindgen stuff. Like WASM bindgen would just always do this, and then WASM package iterates over all those and slurps up package JSON. So I think implementation wise, it's pretty simple.
Yeah, I don't anticipate it would be hard. I was just trying to think because I did not think about this yet. I wasn't sure if there'd be anything weird, but I don't know. I think a naive first thing that actually does the recursive crawl shouldn't be that difficult. And like practically speaking, I'm not sure we have those crates yet. So that's kind of
It's true.
nice. But I mean, we should have them soon. So
I've seen this as kind of one of the primary draws of WASM Pack. The fundamental design is that I use npm and you have no idea, and it just works. Although Nick, I don't know if you want to talk more about. I think you had some questions about like the merging algorithm. So like,
I was just about to bring that up. I was like, oh, do we want to try and do any solving?
so like that, I think is totally fine to just bail out in an
Yeah.
MVP. So like if you have two, just forget about it. But Nick, I don't know if you feel differently.
So you're talking about like I depend on foo o.1 and then they depend on foo o.2 and we both get pulled into the same graph.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's one level of the solving. And then there's a second one.
Yeah, so this is something where like I think both of you have a lot more experience with this problem than I do, having worked on package managers. So,
Well,
yeah, I defer to both of you, is what I'm saying.
I think it's fair to just say let's not figure something out. Let's just say that's an error for now, and it's practically not going to come up for a long time, and so we can figure it out later.
I don't necessarily think it has to be an error, but I think that we can potentially get away with it not being error, but we would have to say it's not optimized. And then the next pass would be it's optimized.
That's also fine, yeah.
So I think we can avoid erroring because of the loose funness of Node and its module system. And its ability to have like 8 versions of one thing in memory and be happy. But I mean, this is how WASM Pack slowly becomes something like Webpack.
We were talking the other day, and WASM bindgen is going to become a full-on optimizing WASM compiler. So, with like in a limit, everything becomes everything else. So it's fine.
Yeah.
It's a race to email client.
Okay, so like one thing I want to do is just say I'm going to make a final is probably not correct, but like a big revision to the RFC. I would really love to get it approved by the next meeting because I think the next releases should contain the implementation, or at least whatever we decide is the first level of that implementation.
Sounds good to me. Yeah, like I think like all the things we've talked about, if those are put into, paragraph form, we're good to go.
I hate paragraph form. No, it's fine. It's fine.
All right. Shall we dive into? I don't think we have anything new triage, but we can just double check real quick. Do we have anything else before we move on?
Triage for RFCs, no. There's someone is trying to handle some weird path issue in WasmPack that I'd like to briefly talk about whenever we get to that part.
Okay.
So I don't know if we want to talk about it here, but we haven't been able to make a lot of progress on the inheritance. Well, the only other RFC we have that we could possibly be talking about. And I don't know if we want to like schedule a particular, like a dedicated meeting to talk about that or do that here, but we might just want to try and make some progress on this to try and push it forward. It's gotten a little bit of discussion recently as well. And
yeah, it repicked up, and I felt like I no longer had any of the context super required to understand exactly where we're at in that convo. I'd be down to have a chat. I saw that like Luke and stuff was weighing in, so it's interesting.
Okay. I can create a doodle and throw it in there and just kind of get all the active participants to try and come together.
Sure.
Yeah, I think that the RFC discussion would benefit from us meeting and then posting some sort of summary so that people kind of know where we're at in the convo and how to proceed.
Yeah. Okay. So are you saying you wanted to do just like a working group team meeting first? Or
I'm fine either way. I was just thinking we probably want to do something to move this forward, and if we want to do that, that's fine. I mean, I'd also be kind of just like I'd be okay with like just discussing here if we have enough time at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll throw that at the bottom. All right. So there's nothing new in our 2018 issues triage. So some Bindgen updates. Alex?
WASM Bindgen updates.
Yeah.
I don't think there really are many WASM Bindgen updates. We've been fixing bugs. I guess we fixed a bug. We fixed a few bugs with platform compatibility, which we realized from the WebSys release, where people actually tried examples in browsers and it didn't work, which is great in the sense that people are trying them. So some issues with Safari have been fixed, specifically with like broken WebIDL and like scoping of locals and something else that I kind of forget. And then there's another one with in Edge, we don't support, or Edge does not have support for text encoder and text decoder. So that's been tweaked and fixed in the sense that we have like some example Webpack configuration of one way to do it, although it's highly unlikely to be the most idiomatic way to do it. So improvements are always welcome to that. But otherwise, all the examples compiled online should be working in all browsers now. Other than that, I don't know. Do you have any WASM Bindgen things you do, Nick?
I don't know. I reviewed a ton of your PRs, but they all were like fairly straightforward little
bug fixes.
detail things, adding inline to functions, etc. So I don't really have anything else. Okay. WasmPack updates.
Yeah, so I have not super paid attention to WasmPack after the huge release last week. It's a small break, which was nice. And what's really awesome is that was a huge release, but we haven't gotten that many issues. So either that means that nobody is using it, or maybe more optimistically, it's actually working pretty well. We did get this one bug about path names on Windows. And they're using the parcel plugin WASM, which I'm not actually familiar with, and is something that I'll bring up when we talk about the bundlers. But it's issue 380, and you can definitely see that the path is doing something pretty bonkers. And so one of the things that I'm kind of curious about is like, we do test on AppVeyor, so this means that it's not, our AppVeyor tests don't cover this, and so it's also kind of hard to know if this is an error in WasmPack, or if this is an error in, this person also appears to be using yarn and parcel. So I think
so we just need like a smaller test case and steps to reproduce to
yeah,
isolate
it was Mackenzie Clark, who has been doing a bunch of stuff on WasmPack lately, opened up a pull request, which is using this canonicalized path function. which I guess is different from canonicalize. But anyways, it might just be something we want to pay attention to because I don't know. I don't know how that happened, and also it's not covered by our tests, so I'm like a little surprised.
I wouldn't be surprised if this was introduced in the parcel plugin, but like either way, it seems clear like we just need to dig in further and isolate the issue.
Yeah.
I'd add that yesterday, just in general WASM-Pack stuff, yesterday I saw someone tweet that they were live streaming going through the Rust and WebAssembly tutorial. And so like I took notes. I watched them for like the first hour or so, and I took notes on what they were doing. And the biggest thing to come out of that was like something that's already on our radar, but just makes me prioritize it more, is emitting output for commands that WASM-Pack runs that are taking a while. Because the first time you do a build, you have to build WASM bindgen, right? And like that takes like longer than a minute. And then you just have this like spinner sitting there. And basically like the person who is streaming and all the people in the chat, like everyone was like, is it doing anything? Is it just like hung? Is there a bug?
Yeah.
Like whatever. So like I'm working on a pull request right now to kind of like handle like child processes that we want like in a kind of uniform way with like heuristics of like we will swallow all of its output unless it starts taking too long. Then we'll start like putting the output out and tie that in with the slog logging as well, because like another thing I've seen is like people having issues on IRC where they're like, hey, this isn't working and I don't know how to get into more. And we're like, hey, what does the log say? And like the log doesn't have the output of the commands that we run. So this is trying to like provide a uniform way to handle all of this stuff so that we can just like solve the issue once and for all.
That sounds super awesome, and it's definitely something I've known that we've needed forever. So yay. If you have a PR, opening a work in progress PR would be awesome, just so that I'm aware and like writing a PR attached. Because I didn't know you were working on that, but that's cool.
I started yesterday at like 5 p.m. So
that's a good time to start a big PR.
Yeah. Anything else?
One thing that we could really benefit from, so with the big release, I like created that little landing page for us, and that was partially because of conversations I had with Till. We don't have any docs for using WASM-Pack in Node, like, or to target Node, even though we have that functionality. And like literally somebody had a question on the issue tracker that was like, can I use this for Node? And then I think Gatozi was confused about what they were asking and like wrote something that was kind of weird, but then I just followed up and I was like, yeah, we can do that. Does this work for you? And they were like, oh yeah, thanks, it's perfect. So I would really love to have the website have kind of like 3 calls to action, which are like, I don't know, learn more about bindgen internals, like create like your hello world for the browser and create a hello world for Node. And we're completely missing the Node one right now. And there's like basically 0 documentation on it. So that would be really beneficial. And then this goes into the bundler stuff, but also making the examples less vendor specific.
The when you said the website's call to actions, do you mean the Rust website that we're working on, or our website, or
the WASM-Pack site that has like the installer? I would like to have something right below it that says like, these are the things that you can do. Because one of the biggest feedbacks about like the WASM-Pack announcement is that if you like don't know what WASM-Pack does, like you probably still don't. And so there's an opportunity to be better about that. And I think calls to action that say like, do this, and then a tutorial that follows will make that better.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Bundlers and templates. So we don't have Sven and Sindil. I've been seeing a lot of action on the parcel template. I have not been following it closely. Does anyone have any better update than that?
I saw that it happened. Is it the thing that people continue to reference, this parcel plugin?
Yeah, the template uses the parcel plugin. Yeah.
Okay, because I would probably say we might want to pay attention to that, because I've been seeing a fair amount of like people being like, I'm trying to use parcel plugin and it's like breaking WasmPack.
Yeah.
Breaking something and we don't know what it is.
Yeah, I interacted with them a little bit. Like they went through the same kind of cycle that the Webpack template went through, or the Webpack plugin, where it was like they're trying to require source librs, and it's like it's not the greatest. Like if you have to require a file and not just like a directory or something, like probably the best thing to do is like the cargo toml. I guess even that can be moved and not exist in cargo toml, but yeah.
So who is in charge of that? Is it Sandil or?
Uh, it seems like Sandil is the one who is working on the template and everything. The person who's working on the plugin is Cat Sigma, who kind of just came out of nowhere. I have no idea who they are or anything like that, but
I mean, awesome.
yeah, definitely awesome. But yeah, we could definitely improve some communication lines.
Cool.
Taking a look at the plugin itself, we may want to help out with her as well, in the sense that it looks like it's generating like JavaScript glue and like kind of polyfilling ES stuff, but that might also be parcel limitations as opposed to not doing it. Because like ideally with a bundler, like everything is ES modules and it all just works out. But I don't think that parcel supports WASM ES modules where they have imports. I think it only supports it where they have exports. Mm-hmm. And so this might be polyfilling that what the current parcelize is today. So that might also be what's going on. And it kind of looks like
an officially supported parcel plugin. Like if I like went to the parcel people and I was like, hey, do you know about this?
I don't think so. I think it's just created.
Okay. Because I was talking to Jamie when I think it may have been Cat Sigma showed up on the WasmPack issue tracker, and he commented on the issue to help try and clarify what's going on. But I think one of the issues, like if I recall correctly, the parcel WASM implementation doesn't leverage WasmPack or WasmBindgen, so maybe this is the community trying to work around that. So
with the parcel plugin?
Yeah.
It is using either WasmPack or WasmBindgen currently. I mean,
the issue that is filed on WasmPack suggests that it's using WasmPack in the background, which is the information I'm operating on. I obviously need to dig a little deeper and figure out exactly what's happening here. It may be something, and I don't know how we feel about this, like, do we think it would be worth it to document bundler strategies? So it's like, so you want to like leverage our tool set with a bundler. Here's the way that people have thought about it and tried. And this is kind of like the strategy that we would strongly recommend. And that is shown by these bundlers. Like it might be useful to do that. Like there is a set of bundlers that are used, but that is also growing and changing. And so it might be helpful, and it might also be helpful for people who end up building custom workflows to begin with. I don't know. Seems like something that I felt like I've needed to communicate multiple times. And so download, like just, I almost said downloading to mean writing. So I'm just going to stop talking now.
I think that makes sense. I think this is difficult in the sense that the bundler needs to have like very native WASM support. It's very difficult to polyfill like the WASM as a plugin per se, but we can at least say that I mean, that would be a good thing to say.
Yeah, it's the kind of documentation that like is super valuable, like probably right now to have it, and then like I don't know, in a year maybe, like no one will care anymore because we'll just have it done.
Right.
Yeah. So with that, are we ready to move on to documentation topics? So again, there were a few things I noticed from watching that stream about ways we could improve the tutorial. They're all pretty small things, like having more precise wording in exercises or whatever, a couple typos. I don't really have much other than that. I don't think there's been, there's one person who was actually going through and like filed an issue because they were having trouble with one of the exercises like in the middle end of the tutorial. So that was pretty sweet that like this person was actually going through the whole thing and doing the exercises. This was the one where it's like, hey, we're representing a cell with a byte, like, but we only need a bit, you know, make it work. I don't know, so that's kind of neat. Yeah, no other updates than that. Are we ready to move on? Or does anyone else have other updates? All right, do you want to talk about future features, Alex?
Yeah, I mostly just kind of wanted to bring this up in the sense that there are a lot of future features coming down the road from upstream like WebAssembly spec, and these include things like threads and atomics. They also include things like SIMD, and this is stuff that Rust is very, very, very well poised to doing so, or to actually leveraging and kind of like using in a very productive fashion. So this isn't necessarily related to kind of like the packaging, it's more of like the functionality story. And I just kind of wanted to give us a quick update where the atomics and threads, we had a really good chat with Luke and a few other folks. We have a pretty solid idea of how to do this, and so I'll be working on implementing that and having like some story for WASMPack and WASMBindgen. And like WASMPack is going to be absolutely crucial to this in the sense that it will be like this, the vision is depending on an NPM package in a very transparent way where like, or yeah, where you don't actually know that it's depending on an NPM package. And so like, that's where tooling is starting to really shine with stuff like that. And with SIMD, LLVM is making a lot of good progress, but I don't, I was realizing last night that no VM actually supports SIMD, so there's no way to run any WASM code that has SIMD. So that part's kind of stalled out. But otherwise, at least I'm personally always interested in kind of how Rust will be supporting future WASM features. And so if anyone has any questions about things like that, feel free to reach out to me. I suspect not here, but maybe like in IRC or whatever.
What NPM package?
This is one where like the idea is we want, it doesn't exist today, but we want one canonical thread pool, and so we'll like probably make one, and that'll be like the one, and make sure that everyone is using that because you don't want to have tons of thread pools. It's like even more important on the web than it is on native.
That's awesome. Sounds cool. I'm looking forward to that stuff.
Yeah, it'll require the current RFC for having dependencies, but we'll get around to it. Yeah,
that should be done by next week.
It's true.
Which ideally is ahead of this shenanigans. So
yeah, and basically our goal.
Oh. Yeah, for the SIMD stuff, we keep changing the opcodes we want to use. So I'll keep you guys up to date on that. I expect that tip of tree V8 and tip of tree LLVM should be in agreement on those. Like within like a week or so. Yeah, it's basically just a matter of changing some numbers and then pushing.
That's awesome. Once that's available, I'll make sure we get all the support in Rust to verify everything. It'll be easy to build. We can always build it from source and just have it in the standard library because it'll all be off by default anyway. But that's perfect.
Cool.
Yeah, a final note on just like threads was in the meeting that Alex referred to earlier, we kind of came up with the goal of like something like Mandelbrot, where we can just like have a specific thing that like we can do work in threads that doesn't require using imports from threads, and like we don't need to have everything working the way we envision it working like long term, but like getting a demo out there. Yeah, so it's just like the first incremental goal. All right, so we want to talk WASMBindgen inheritance or WebSys inheritance or whatever.
Yeah, sure. So this.
I have one thing before we dive into that. Sorry, and it's just this. So I've been talking to Till. And I think it would be very useful for us to work on getting some type of analytics for our tool set, both around adoption and usage. I've been talking with Till about kind of like what is some low-hanging fruit, particularly native modules in Node and stuff that would be good for us to kind of like snag and rewrite. Till has taken my Markdown parser suggestion and run with it, and hopefully he'll have something next week. But I do want to make sure that we start doing that kind of work, and especially with the installer. I filed an issue about this on WasmPack, but like the crates.io downloads were already like a bad measure, and now they're like even less useful. So I do think that we should at least start thinking about how we are going to do that type of work in addition to outreach. Also, just because, I don't know, I've been doing a lot of workshops and I think that helps, but I want to make it a more integrated part of our team, that like it's something that everybody's working on.
And the idea here is like figuring out how to collect, like, say empirically what's going on and like track what's ish in a sense.
Yeah, I think that'd be useful. I don't know if I want to do this right now in WasmPack, but it might be useful like pre 1.0, which I think we're still aiming to do a 1.0 in December, which is like terrifying, but like, okay. Where when I worked at NPM, we added analytics to the CLI, like scraped, like sanitized all of the personal identifying information, but like would ping a server with like what command was run. So I don't know if we want to go that far, but I do think that we should be trying to make sure that we keep an eye on like how many people are using it. And maybe that starts qualitatively, but yeah, I do want it to be something that we pay attention to.
When we
So maybe add
design
a section
whatever,
to this meeting about that, because I guess I keep kind of waiting for it, and then whenever we go to like whatever the last topic is, I'm like, oh no. I do it in like literally every meeting. So
I think we should, this is the kind of thing where like it's easy for it to be misinterpreted, and like we have to be careful to not have personally identifiable information in there and stuff, right?
oh yeah.
And so like it might be good to once we kind of like figure out a design that we think will work, like make an RFC, is that's like our main avenue for like communicating with the wider community on these kinds of decisions.
Oh yeah. I think if we end up implementing like a technical solution, it absolutely should be an RFC. And I think potentially long term, if we see enough usage, we will want a technical solution. But I think before we really even think about the technical solution, we should be trying to like do what we can now. Like if that's from like count the number of blog posts that happened, count the, but like I think that those numbers are important. If anything, so we can give Till numbers so that they don't try and reduce the WebAssembly team at Mozilla, which is already tiny and has lost headcount. So
yeah, I don't think we're like,
I think the numbers are
I don't
important.
think that's an issue. Like I don't think that's we have an existential threat going on here.
I don't think there's an existential threat now, but I do think that proving the value of WebAssembly is something that needs to be like measured, because right now
Something that a manager can show their manager.
Yeah, I mean, even just from like my conversations with Sandra and the DevRel and marketing people, they are very excited about marketing WebAssembly. And so I think there's kind of like a lack of investment on the technical side. And so I just like, this is how you work in orgs, like you get the numbers. And I think it's a good thing to do. So
yeah. I think one thing we could probably do right now would be throw like Google Analytics or something on our download page. And like, yeah.
That's what I suggest in the issue I put on WasmPack, mostly as a like, if you hate Google Analytics, like tell me. No one's responded, so.
Yeah. All right. Are we ready for inheritance?
Sure.
All right. So I do want to give you like a state of play of what we currently have, I think.
That would be useful, yeah.
All right. So this has been a very long discussion, and so what we currently have is that there is a proposal currently saying that we should have all about inheritance and as a WebSys, but also not just for WebSys, but kind of a story that is applicable, which we can extend to NPM packages as well once we start finding those. And so the current proposal is to use traits, very similar to what Web is using today, where the idea is that every struct that we have in WebIDL generates a struct in Rust, but also a trait, where the trait is just the struct name prefixed with capital I. And the trait has a bunch of methods, and then that'll kind of properly and then that's implemented for like all superclasses and all subclasses. And basically it's using trait inheritance and trait hierarchies to model the inheritance of the DOM and all that good business. So there's various pros and cons to that. I'm not gonna go too much into those just yet. The primary alternative is using deref, where we just say that every type just derefs to the parent class. This is like the Rust trait deref. And so that is also a way to model hierarchies, sort of, but isn't really done elsewhere in Rust. It's just a way to do it here. Some of the more recent discussion has been revolving, or some of the discussion about these two approaches is how they primarily about how they handle overridden methods. So I have a class foo and a class bar. Bar inherits from foo or extends foo, whatever. They both have the same method name, and there's some relationships in two of them, and somehow they get overridden one way or another. So traits will like handle this one way. Deref will handle this a different way, and there's various pros and cons there. And one of the more recent discussions has been about how in WasmBindGen today, by default, we will mark methods as what I'm going to call final. That's a great name for coming out of discussion. And by final, I mean that we pick a function out of the prototype, like we literally reach inside the prototype, capital foo.prototype.method name. And then whenever you call a function, like it says like that function object dot call of all the various arguments. And so by doing this, we are bypassing all prototype lookup in JavaScript by saying we want only this one precise function. Do not do prototype lookup. Do not do anything related to that. Now, there's a way to subvert this in WasmBindGen where you can say that a method is being bound as structural. And structural means that the shim that is generated by WasmBindGen to actually invoke it does use prototype lookup. It'll say this dot foo as opposed to the prototype method dot call foo. And so that allows it to actually use the prototype chain, and you don't have to worry about things like that. And so this is where one of the primary benefits of a trait-based solution is you do not have to worry about structural versus not. It almost always just works out. Whereas in a deref-based solution, you very much do, because if I give a subclass, like a ampersand very base subclass, and I call a method, the structure, the final version would always call the very, very small subclass, whereas you probably want like the superclass, whoever overrode it. So anyway, and then there was some discussion about whether do we actually want to switch WasmBindGen to structural by default, where instead of final by default, which is what we have right now. And some very naive performance gathering seems to show that the final method, which we thought was going to be faster, and not only in the current term, but also in the long term with host bindings, is actually currently slower or roughly the same speed as structural, which is the like prototype chain lookup. And so this is a case where those two strategies, it's not clear. If we switch to structural by default, it kind of changes the calculus of whether like the pros and cons of deref and traits and whatnot. So anyway, that's kind of a lot of where we're at right now, but does that make sense to you?
Sort of. My question, I guess, based on what you just said, which is maybe just you exposing your bias, I can't even tell, why is the deref one good? It seems like the traits one is like overwhelmingly better in my mind, but maybe I'm like missing something. Like, what is the argument pro deref?
Right, and so this goes into the pros and cons of the two, which I kind of skipped over. But so deref is very simple, it's very easy to implement, and it's kind of very natural to understand from a perspective where we're not introducing abstractions, we're not trying to say this is how you should abstract over things, and it's very easy to grasp for new people. Whereas traits, so that's like
to me. Like I feel differently, but that's fine.
And then, but one of the downsides is it is not necessarily handling inheritance correctly,
right?
Where you're not doing the overridden thing as you would want otherwise. So but if everything is structural, then deref works everywhere, and it's unclear whether there's a major downside to it. So with traits,
the major pro for deref is that it's simple and easy for beginners.
I can go more into the cons of. I mean, I'll go more into the cons of traits, which is, but so it's best contrasted with that. And so with traits, like right now, one of the biggest pros is that it does handle the inheritance correctly if everything is final. But some of the cons are that it does like that I have expressed. I mean, I am pro deref, and so this is a little bit biased towards like the deref side as opposed to the trait side. So traits, traits are inherently just very complicated. Like I say that deref is simple, but like it's hard to overstate how complicated I feel like it would be if there are just traits all over the place. And so it's a little less ergonomic where like now I have to make sure to import all the traits, and you could glob import, but like you have to import something to import all the traits to get any functionality at all. Whereas deref, it's all inherently available. With traits, now you have to make decisions between static dispatch and dynamic dispatch. So you could take a trait object, or you could take a generic. And so once you start using generics, that means that you actually start getting a code explosion, both in compiled code, where you're saying like, if I'm passing in all these subclasses and they're all getting their own monomorphized version, whereas in the deref version, you just take ampersand base class, and as long as it's structural, it'll all work out. And you'll compile one version, it works. And it's much smaller in code size. And then also kind of like, I think the trait object, like it really is just the complexity of traits of like dealing with trait objects, dealing with generics, and now everyone's writing generics everywhere, causing code bloat problems, or like compile time problems as well, where you're deferring code generation all the way to the very end of the crate. Yeah. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but it's also
no. I think I definitely see where you're coming from. I think it's very interesting. I see what you mean by like the difference in like simplicity and complexity between deref and traits. I guess traits, like if I take it exclusively from like ignoring implementation for a second and think about conceptually, like if we were talking about implementing inheritance, like leveraging traits like in concept makes a lot more sense to me. And I feel like traits are a concept that a lot more people are more familiar with. And like deref, like I can kind of go like traits are mix-ins and like kind of be able to explain that to somebody, whereas like deref I think is significantly more complicated. Whereas like I don't know how I would talk about deref in JavaScript.
It is interesting in the sense that like this is I see this as like a detail of the library author as opposed to details of consumers, where deref means that consumers just don't even worry about it. They just don't even know that's happening. They just use dot methods and they get all the inheritance. Whereas with traits, it affects everyone, both the library authors and the consumers. So the consumers have to say like, how am I taking the trait? I have to go import the trait everywhere, things like that.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I think it's interesting. That's
I mean,
kind of where
it's also
I'm at.
worth pointing out, we've considered, like, this is not the first attempt to model a trait and a class inheritance hierarchy from a foreign language in Rust, and every conclusion previously has been let's not use deref for various reasons. And so favoring deref is very interesting here, but that's in the sense that it's very specific to JavaScript, where like on the WebSys side of things, like the deref doesn't work when you have like, I forget exactly all the other precise reasons, but it's largely related to inheritance and overwriting actual methods. Whereas with the web, like for the WebSys, it doesn't matter at all, because there's like, we did some analysis and there's like no shadowing anywhere, so there's no overwriting at all, or effectively none. And then for the NPM at large, if we use structural everywhere, then it also solves that. And it's not clear why you would not use structural everywhere, because there's like some points about like, it's just less of a foot gun. Like you just can't get it wrong if you always use structural. And for the WebSys crate, we're generating it, so we know we're right. And it'd be very easy for us to just generate final annotations there. And so it's actually a pretty compelling case to me that we should switch to structural by default, and then just in our generated code, wherever we need performance in the hypothetical feature that host bindings is super performant, that's where we start applying final.
And also when host bindings actually starts shipping, like I think it's okay to make a breaking change at that point. And
do we have an idea of when host bindings is going to start shipping?
Long time. We're still
that's
very
what I thought. Okay.
Yeah.
Like we're talking like a year.
My guess would be that.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want to make sure my headcanon was at least aligned with reality somewhat.
Yeah. The other thing I want to mention about the like trait-based thing is that like no matter which version you choose, you don't really get a good result. Like you can either use generics and then you get code blow up from monomorphization, right? But
Yeah.
it's not actually like useful code blow up because you're not getting like new inlining capabilities or whatever, right? And then if you're using trait objects, you're creating an indirection, but like that indirection is unnecessary because like the JavaScript side of things already kind of has this indirection inherent in it. So there's like no good win here. And again, like this is kind of pushing me towards just making everything structural because like it's already structural on the JavaScript side, right? And like it's already fast enough. So like why try and like push this into the Rust, I guess.
Yeah, I think that makes a bunch of sense.
Now, in terms of procedurally, I don't really know the best way to proceed on this RFC in terms of like that is a radically different RFC saying like, let's rethink everything from the ground up and say everything's structural by default. And now, hey, look, DRF makes a lot more sense because it has the major downside is now gone. And so I don't know if we want to have that be like a revision of this RFC or like try and post it on this RFC or I don't know.
I think that's probably a new RFC.
Well, so what I would suggest is on the currently open RFC, like once I get this on YouTube or whatever, we should like post this video with like a pointer to the conversation at least, but then kind of just summarize like what's on the table, like deref versus trait, but then also then if we want to make everything structural, and like summarize that, put that out there, and then say, would one of us want to write that RFC? Like the new one? Because we can post that and then maybe post that at the same time as posting a separate RFC. Don't close the current one necessarily right away. And then like just kind of have that information out there and then like see how the conversation proceeds. But like, I think that's how I would proceed.
That makes sense. I think I would agree with that. I would personally be willing to be on the hook for writing an RFC for this.
Cool. I mean, this kind of leaves open the fact that like if this new RFC is like not a good attempt at finding like a intermediate consensus and then presenting it and moving forward, all the conversation will just happen on the old RFC and then we'll be like, oh, that was a mistake, and then like try again.
Yep.
I would anticipate that things will move over, but it does at least always give that opportunity so it doesn't seem like, you know, we decided that this is the way we want to go, and then everyone's like, that didn't happen on the thread, and they get grumpy.
We're shutting this down. This is
right. No shutting down is happening.
All right. We are 2 minutes away from the end of the hour. I'd say that's pretty good timing. Do we have more to talk about here? I mean, that sounded pretty conclusive to me.
One thing, very short, I don't feel like I've gotten do you all have impressions from the 05 release of Webpack? Like, do you feel like you've seen more people use it, less people use it, lots of people love it, no information about it?
So I have received a couple of like random DMs from people being like, I just finally tried this out and it was really good. I don't really know. That's not like really, like this is part of me being like, we need analytics because I have like no way of being able to tell. So one thing that is interesting that I expected to see and didn't, though exactly what the implications are kind of hard to derive, which is the number of people downloading WasmPack daily didn't super move. And I expected with the installer that it would. So either that means that people aren't using the installer or the number of people installing WasmPack went up, so that the amount that it went up is the number of people using the installer and the people using Cargo remain the same. But like, I have no way to measure that information.
Yeah, that's true.
I know that there's been a couple blog posts, a couple like conference talks that either happened before the release or happened and got published afterwards. I don't know.
Okay, I was just curious too if there was any major news.
Yeah, I wish I had more information. I mean, I ended up publishing it at like 10 p.m. Eastern time, and it still got a ton of attention on Twitter. But again, I have no idea if those people are actually using it or just trying to make me feel good. I have no idea.
I know that like we were getting a bunch of complaints from people about how slow like rebuilding was, and
Yep.
they're not getting those complaints anymore, right? And so like a answer to that is like everyone stopped using it, but I don't think that's true given like people are still going through the tutorial and stuff, right? And they used to go through the tutorial and complain about rebuilding, and now they're still going through the tutorial, as far as I can tell, but they're not complaining about the rebuilds. So that sounds like,
Yeah, and I
not
know that
conclusive, but good.
you went through and cleaned up a bunch of issues, and then I also went through and cleaned up a bunch of issues saying like the latest release should like solve all your problems. Like please comment if it didn't. And no one has commented. So yeah. One thing I've been thinking about doing, and I don't know if it's a good idea, it goes back to the metrics thing, is because we write a package JSON, I could just add a custom key that's called like WASM-pack or something, and then crawl the NPM registry and find out how much stuff ends up on there. It would mean someone could obviously manually remove the key and then we wouldn't know, but trying to get a sense of if people are even using it, who knows.
For what it's worth, we've always wanted metrics in the Rust project, and even just for Rust itself, we've never really known what a great way to track these things.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, the WebAssembly community group also had a proposal this week to add the toolchain information as a custom section in the WASM module itself.
Yeah, I saw that. I was mentioned on that issue, and I know that, was it resolved how they're going to like mention the version name, like the version number?
I don't think anything's been resolved.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was just brought up as an idea.
Cool. Yeah, that was like the question I asked a while ago.
Because I think there was unanimous consent to pursue it, to like pursue the idea of this. Sounds like a pretty good idea, but no details about like the actual implementation details and things like that. You know?
Right. Nobody's had a chance to bike shed the actual design.
Yeah.
Yeah, that will be really cool. Though building a tool that then goes and finds that and like counts it is also kind of weird and complicated. So
Well, I think it'd be pretty straightforward for browsers to do that. And then
for a browser, I guess I meant like from a project standpoint that doesn't have browser data.
I think it would be nice if browsers shared all of this stuff. Like Chrome shares all of its whatever data, like usage of like CSS or whatever. And like certainly like we have access to the Firefox data via all of our connections, right? So I think we have ways to like push to say, hey, like you should be releasing this information for everyone to see.
Yeah, if it's in Node though or something, then we don't get it. That's why I'd like to use NPM as like the data bank. And like I could crawl NPM, download all the WASM, read the custom segments, and then build graphs. But
yeah,
it's easier to read a package JSON than to untar and poke at the WASM files themselves.
It's true.
All right. Are we good?
I think so.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for coming, everyone. And talk to you all next week.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.